I think Nick Sirianni was on the hot seat in the 2024 offseason. What does he have to do to avoid that hot seat yet again next year? We'll get into that and more on this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm one of your two hosts, Louis DiBiase, joined as always by Gino Camilleri. We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. On today's edition of the podcast, we're going to discuss what Nick Sirianni has to do this year to keep his head coaching job with the Eagles. Plus, 2023, we've talked about it before, one of the biggest collapses of a contender in not only franchise history, but NFL history. What were some of the positives of last year we want to keep in 2024? All that and more coming your way. And Gino, today's a special episode. We have done together in 7 seasons now 1,400 podcasts. I mean, that is just an insane amount of episodes.
1,400 shows that have been on any streaming platform, YouTube, and we've done countless extra shows when it comes to the draft and some on Saturday,
countless tweets.
Sunday.
I mean,
but I haven't done many things 1,400 times. So to say that we have done that,
yeah, man,
I don't think there's any other Eagles podcast that has gone that many episodes. Maybe in an entire length there could be some shows. I think Ruben Frank's show potentially. I think maybe Birds with Friends is right around the same time. But if you've tuned in for one show, 10 shows, 100 shows, 1,400 shows, thank you. Because if not, seriously, it's just Lou and I talking to each other. Yeah,
which we do anyway, but it's nice to know we've got this audience for sure. Yeah, I mean, 1,400 is it's surreal, and I'm with you. I don't think I've ever been part of a job for more than 5 to 6 years, so to be doing this for 7 years talking Birds
I've never been at a job more than 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Fed up with the people in front of me, or just get bored with the work, and that's a testament to those
for sure
who put us in this position where we get to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles.
And this toxic team never stops being interesting, Gino, for better or worse.
Yeah, I said it to you the other day. Imagine if we went back to 12-year-old Gino and Lou and told them, hey, you would do 1,400 episodes of the Eagles podcast. You'd probably say you're crazy.
Think it's a dream come true, but yeah.
We love them. But at the same time, it's work, man, because like you said, it is a toxic fan base, but the expectations are high, and that's why we love doing it, because it's a team that has a winning history in our entire lineage here being
we're kind of spoiled.
30 years in my case, and 27
for, me,
for Lou, so let's keep it going, man. I don't want to go anywhere. I want to continue to get this thing and get a Super Bowl, because we came in right after that 2017 Super Bowl win. So let's get another one here on LOE.
I totally agree. Yeah, we Gino and I met at Super Bowl 52, the watch party at the Fillmore in downtown Philly. We started the show together the summer of that Super Bowl offseason.
August 21st was my first show.
Pretty crazy.
Blue, so.
And again, there's been a lot of ups and downs with this football team, a lot of Super Bowl trips, a lot of playoff trips, a lot of great quarterback play, but also a lot of downs too. And there's been some firings with, quarterbacks, with head coaches. And, the Eagles did decide to keep Nick Sirianni this past offseason. I was okay with letting him go. I understand the logic behind keeping him. He's one of the most successful coaches in the first 3 years of his tenure that we've ever seen from a record standpoint. And just the resume is definitely impressive. I do wonder what you think about what he has to do this year, though, to keep his job, because we know the Eagles have fired coaches for a lot less than what Nick Sirianni, I think, was responsible for or a big part of last year. And I think there's a very high standard here that, just making the Wild. Doug Peterson, we saw what happened 2018, 2019. The guy won a playoff game with all these injuries, got back and won the division the following year, only got one more season, and he was out the door. Like, it's kind of championship or bust, especially when you have the kind of talent you do right now. I do wonder if Nick Sirianni, if just getting to the playoffs is going to be enough, what the ceiling he has to meet. For me personally, I would want it to be the Final Four. They need to get back to the NFC Championship. But for the Eagles, I'm very curious, where their head's at.
I can't imagine, after seeing the way Jeffrey Lurie looked in that final game against Tampa Bay when they shot up to him in the press box, and he just looked despondent up there. He did not look happy with the team that was on the football field. And let's settle in the middle. Let's say a semifinal.
Yeah, what if they get to the divisional round? They win one playoff game.
If they get to the divisional round and it's a one-score game and it's a shootout with, let's say, San Francisco, like you lose 35-32 or something similar to the Super Bowl score a couple years ago, I could see that being the case. But the thing is, when you have expectations that are that high, that you caused, Nick Sirianni, because you got to the Super Bowl.
I was going to say justifiably so. This team has a Super Bowl expectation for a reason.
and that's a place that if you're a head coach, you want to be. You want to be pushed to the edge, right? You never want to be on the edge being, let's say, a Jason Garrett with his time with the Cowboys, where it's like, if we could just get to the playoffs, it's enough.
Yeah, Mike Tomlin for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, that's how he's been keeping his job for a decade.
That cannot be the mindset if you want to win a Super Bowl, because one, it makes your head coach comfortable. Two, it makes the players comfortable. Like, hey, this guy's not being held.
I think complacent is the better word.
Yes, exactly. And I think you kind of get into a United States men's soccer situation where it's like, we're going to really play for this subpar head coach.
Very timely analogy.
Show up and be in shape, and we can be a team that loses in the first or second round. No, that's not Philadelphia. And Jeffrey Lurie has given you plenty of examples with not just Doug Peterson, but Andy Reid, man. I mean, he fired a guy who has gone on to win multiple Super Bowls because the expectation is that he wants to be competing for the NFC title at a minimum.
Right.
Like you said, justifiably so, though, when it comes to Jeffrey Lurie and when it comes to Howie Roseman and now when it comes to Nick Sirianni. Because Jeffrey, how many times has he seen it, Lou? He's seen this thing, the NFC Championship, being at least playing in that game a quarter of the seasons that he's on the team.
7 times? Yeah.
So that's the expectation, regardless of who the head coach is, and especially now knowing where the personnel sits, where Jalen Hurts is tied to you, and A.J. Brown is tied to you, and Devontae Smith is tied to you. And
his team's too good to be a first or second round football team. Yeah.
And if Nick Sirianni can't be the guy to coach them and get the guys in place to coach them, to put them in a position to succeed, they're going to find somebody else to do it. But I believe, and we're talking about the positives of this, that Nick, in this situation, if he can be this GM type of head coach that oversees everything and he sees an uptick in the situational offense in the red zone, especially now with Kellen Moore, somebody who's really good in that department, and your 2-minute offense is really good, and that 8-minute section in the right before halftime and right after halftime gets a lot better than it was last year, and the way you start games gets a lot better, then you can measure success with Nick Sirianni that way.
Yeah.
But if the offense goes off the rails or the defense goes off the rails, how are we going to measure this?
Correct. Because context is everything.
You can throw the scapegoat at one of the coordinators if that's the situation. But with Nick Sirianni, it has to fall on those areas that we have talked about. And I think it'll be evident when you're in a close game and then all of a sudden you get pushed over when push comes to shove and adversity hits. We've talked about that time and time again. What are they going to do when adversity hits? Well, that's where you're going to see if they're going to play for Nick Sirianni, if that message has come across, and his messaging has to be key this year because people, I think more people outside of the building than inside, but I'm sure there are people inside that building that maybe their patience is getting a little tested with Nick. The first time that message doesn't stick and they go on, let's say, a 2-game skid where they don't perform well, Lou, and there is a little bit of a rumbling, a little bit of a coup starting to form, that's when things can go downhill badly.
Like it did last year.
But good teams, Lou, and last year was not a good football team. We know that it was not a good football team. They don't let that pressure get to them. They don't let it cave. They play for everybody around them besides their head coach, and they let the GM and the owner figure that out in the offseason.
It's the way things go down, Gino, that's going to be key. And that's context. Like, I don't want to say if this is the result of the season, Sirianni's losing his job. Because like you said, for me, it's, again, if you are going to zoom out, I think they need to at least get to the Final Four and make the NFC Championship because that's how good this football team is. And
like a top 10 offense.
Yeah, and there's some good rosters in this conference, but it's not the AFC where it's just a quarterback gauntlet. Like they should get back talent-wise. They are just as good right now on paper as San Francisco. And I know the 49ers should be seen as the team in this conference, but less than 2 years ago, you destroyed that team in an NFC title. So I don't want to suddenly say the Eagles belong in another tier from a talent perspective. So those are the expectations. But you're right. Like if they lose in the divisional round in a shootout, are they going to fire him? Probably not. It just depends on how they get to where they go. Like if it is last year where it feels like the team quit again, then that's on the culture guy that's not calling plays anymore. 100%. If it does look like this team was fighting for Sirianni and they rallied around him and it just resulted in a second round out, then again, that would change things, So I think context is key.
But if you again with process over outcome again here on this show.
But they do need to make it, to me though, like I am expecting the Final Four, and if not, I already don't like the setup of a head coach that doesn't call plays. I don't love the way this dynamic is. I like the coordinators he has in place, but I'm already not a big fan of that setup. And I like some of the candidates next year. Like if Ben Johnson, for instance, decides he wants to be a head coach, I think Philadelphia is going to look out there and say, sure, Sirianni can get us to a certain floor, but this talent on the roster can almost take any head coach to that floor. So can we upgrade? And that's going to be the really interesting conversation depending on what happens.
Well, I mean, Nick Sirianni should feel a lot of pressure, especially internally, having Kellen Moore there. But in a good sense, like I think the tone on this discussion, it has a negative connotation to it. But I think we believe in Nick Sirianni, and we've seen that before. It's not like we're grasping at straws. Like, can they get to this point? Can
we know they
McCarthy get Dallas to a Super Bowl? That's yet to be seen. Like, they're still waiting to see on that. We've seen that Nick Sirianni can get you there.
Right.
But it's what have you done for me lately in this league? You have to do it again. This roster isn't going anywhere. Head coaches, they change like the wind in this league. And Kellen Moore, you talk about somebody who calls plays. They're like, hey, the offense looks good. This guy's calling plays. We get back to the Nick Sirianni, what do you exactly do here discussion. That might be happening down the road. But if everything works out and they have this nice three-headed approach and add Mike Clay into that conversation as well, and the coaching staff really does seem to mesh and there's no finger pointing, I think the sky is the limit with this group, because if Nick Sirianni can get that message across, it means it clicked with the offense and the defense and everybody is buying in and this team is competing for that Final Four, like you're saying. And we're saying, are they going to win the Super Bowl this year, which we should be discussing year in and year out with this team.
For sure. And 2023 is a big reason, again, that the seat is a lot warmer for Nick Sirianni in 2024. There were some positives, though, in 2023, especially in the beginning of the year. I want to get into coming up next on the show. What are some things from last year the Eagles did well that they should take into this season? So we'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
This Friday edition of LOE is brought to you by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Got to turn down the volume with all the shouting? We'll make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we kind of were getting into a lot of what Nick Sirianni has to do this year to keep his head coaching job moving forward for the Philadelphia Eagles, because 2023, Gino, was so drastically bad at the end, and so much of that looked like it was on the culture. It was on the vibe of that team, and Nick Sirianni is kind of Mr. Vibe, right? That was what made him great over the first 2 years in Philly. It wasn't his play calling, because he gave those duties up to Shane Steichen early on in his tenure. So that was always his bread and butter. And then when they lost at the end of the year, kind of with that at the forefront, it made a lot of people, including us, question if he's going to be the guy. But I will say, this team at one point last year still looked like a unit that was 10-1, beating really good teams, was on the verge of getting the 1 seed in the conference. Like, there were a lot of positives to take from the majority of last season. Not that the first 11, 12 games were perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but there was a lot of positives. Is there anything for you that you say they should take what they did last year that was good, keep that this year, and apply that into 2024? Or something, maybe the outcome that happened that you would want to see again.
Yeah, I think it's more of the outcome and how you can
that's where my head's going
that
too.
Message going forward. And I think if you look at that middle stretch of games, for example, where you were in it with the best
the gauntlet.
Of the best.
Yeah.
You were in that gauntlet, and you were,
because they crushed the gauntlet.
Some teams that were in the Final Four conversation, like we keep talking about. And you were able to hang with them. And the one thing that we kept saying down the stretch that, 99% of the shows were like, oh, this is going to go exactly the way that we think. And they've shown us who they were. It's past Thanksgiving. We know who this team is. But at one point, you saw how dominant they were. So if those skeletons are out of the closet and you still remember who you were, because you have one of the best QBs in the league. Your offense was predicated on guys just simply dominating time in and time out.
It was just about talent.
What
really.
did they do? They dominated. A.J. Brown went on a stretch of pure domination. Devontae Smith was steadily consistent well through the season. Your offensive line, was it the best that they have been in the last couple of years? Definitely not, but they still showed signs of brilliance in that stretch. The one thing that you have to get back to is throw away 2023 for the defense, though. I don't think there's any positives you can.
I was trying to think of something, Gino, and it all came from offense.
And you can't just sit back and say, oh, we're going to be better than 2023. That can't be the message. For the defense, the message has to be, do you want to be remembered as a worse unit than 2023, or do you want to completely erase that from the memory of fans? Because a lot of those guys that we're talking about were on that unit. Yeah, they were in the Super Bowl, a lot of them, but at the same time, in Philly, the last thing you showed them, that's what fans are going to talk about. And the last thing that they showed them was Baker Mayfield absolutely shredding their defense. After he got shredded for a month and a half, they have to get back to that no-fly mentality, we are going to get to the quarterback down in and down out mentality. But I think looking at that gauntlet and knowing as a team we can dominate in stretches when we want to, that's what you have to remember.
We're kind of going in the same direction here, because I almost could take that gauntlet and the collapse and say there's a positive spin. Like, if we can beat some of those teams with all the problems we had at the coaching positions, on the defense, if we can beat Miami and Dallas and Buffalo and Kansas City in close games and comebacks a lot of the time in the second half because of our offense just winning in shootouts, and that's why I always say it's so important to keep that trio of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Smith together, because they were carrying your football team for 2 months. And so if they can elevate you, but everything else comes together, this team can't be stopped. And that's what's encouraging, is those three were kind of the ones carrying you, and yet you were still beating these incredible teams. That's how talented this team can be. And if you can get everything else to work around them, I mean, that stretch to me is too highlighted. I mean, and too, you look at the way they were doing it. Jalen Hurts at one point that season had 5 straight wins when facing 10-plus point deficits in the second half. That was tied for the longest streak since 1950. That's a huge win that you can take heading into this year.
And we do harp on them a lot, this 2023 unit.
Yeah.
When it comes to how they responded to adversity. But one of those elements of adversity is how you respond late in games.
Mm-hmm.
Did they do it well in the later half of the season? Obviously, no.
It's
but like you had just said, those things are going to get washed away in the discussion because that's the last thing that we saw. But there were games, Lou.
A lot of
stretches of games where this team was down 14-plus points going
against
into
good
the half,
teams.
against good teams. And Jalen Hurts and that offense single-handedly kept them in contention.
That is a fair point. There wasn't an entire season last year where they were never answering adversity. They were doing it the majority of the year.
Like
that's what makes last year so weird.
In 2022.
Yeah, and that's what makes last year so strange because it was the complete opposite story. Like the first half of the year, it was they were always answering. We would say how many times in this podcast they just always find a way, and they never could find a way. I've never seen anything like it.
And then it became the benefit of the doubt towards the end of the year.
No, it's crazy. I think that's the focus, though. That's the positive take. And like A.J. Brown's dominant 6-game stretch where he's having over 120 yards a game. Like if you can get players that just go on game-breaker type of runs, and that was A.J. Brown last year. But, there were times in 2022, like that was Hassan Reddick. That was Devontae Smith. Heck, that was Jalen Hurts or even Miles Sanders at times. Like last year was really only A.J. Brown, but if you can get some guys to go nuclear at times too, like that really does help, especially when you have injuries and you have things that aren't going right because it's not always going to be as smooth as 2022.
We always talk about floor and ceiling on this show, and the message I would ultimately give if I'm the guys in that locker room. If we work 10 times as hard as we did last year, and we know what the floor is, we're going to be better off. Mm-hmm. If we work 50 times as hard as we did last year, look at where we can be. If we work double as hard as what we did last year, Lou, the sky truly is the limit with this football team. And that's what they have to remember because it is a good football team. They won big-time games, but they can't be that puppy that loses its way once again. But I believe they have the leaders. They brought in the right guys. You got the Saquons that are now going to be also in contention for some of these yards that we're talking about and pick up these nuclear type of games. And same with Bryce Huff. You're going to see him pick up the Hassan Reddick slack. So this is exciting, man. We're 2 months away from actually seeing this team in action. How quickly do they wipe away the sins of 2023? I think they do it quickly. I think it's more of us just sitting and waiting, talking about this for it to come. The guys inside of the building, they're ready to move on. They already have moved on, and I think they're going to hit the ground rolling with this unit that they have.
All right, today is Friday, so it's Fan Friday right here on Locked On Eagles. We're going to hear from one of our listeners coming up next. A great question that has to do with the holidays, as the 4th of July was yesterday. So we'll get into it coming up next. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by BetterHelp. I've learned something throughout the years for sure through therapy. Comparison truly is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together, especially on social media. You look at their Instagram page, the traveling, it just looks like they're living the perfect life. But in reality, they probably aren't living that life. Therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life for you. If you're thinking of starting therapy, make sure to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule, whether you're working the 9 to 5, the graveyard, overnight shift. BetterHelp can be flexible in that way, so just fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched with a licensed therapist. If it's not the right fit with that therapist, you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing yourself to others. Start focusing on you with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today. You're going to get 10% off your first month. Once again, that's BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month of online therapy. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. The way we're going to be doing it for a bit, Fan Friday. Got to hear from our listeners, especially the guys that have been around for all 1,400 episodes Gino and I have been doing, which is still unbelievable. And this is a fun question to wrap up the week, and this is from Mark Gordano on Twitter, who wrote in yesterday to me. This was a cool one of my DMs. So yesterday was the 4th of July, and he wrote in that he said, boys, love the podcast. Got an interesting question for you. I like to do an Eagles rewatch during the holidays, especially when I can have the monitor projector outside on the patio. I've been doing Super Bowl 52 a lot. That's the staple move. What other games would you suggest when you have a big group of people over just to have an Eagles game on in the background? And that's a really good question. Super Bowl 52 is the obvious one, and it's so entertaining because of the shootout. But there are some good ones, man. I think shootouts are the key, especially if it's like a holiday, the drinks and food are flowing. Like, give me a game with a lot of points.
I think the key element of this discussion is a game you want to have on in the background, and not a game where
it's not a game where everyone's sitting around dialed in.
Yeah. A game where you want it on in the background is one of those games that has a lot of chaotic.
So anytime you look over, something cool is happening. I got one after thinking about that.
I'm thinking about games like the Washington Monday
I'm
night
thinking
game.
The Monday Night Massacre 2010. That's a great one.
You throw that on, you're like, oh, first play of the game, we're kind of in this thing now. And
that might be the one.
Everybody to sit around.
Miracle in the New Meadowlands, too, of course.
A good one. Meadowlands, and you look back at maybe like the Snow Bowl. That's a good one. It's 4th of July.
One. I didn't even think of that.
Nice and warm. You want to cool down a little bit, so
one.
you throw the snow game on in the background. If you go a little bit before that, I'm thinking back to the Donovan McNabb years. I think the 4th and 26 game, you want to talk about excitement where you kind of the party's winding down a little bit, but the game is still getting close, and it's like, all right, we got to see this big play coming up, and boom, you see 4th and 26, or you see the NFC Championship game that they won against Atlanta, the LG Crumpler hit. That would be a great one to watch as well.
I think also blowout games would be fun, right? You look at a game in 2017 or 2022 where Carson Wentz or Jalen Hurts are just going off. Like the first Eagles game I ever went to in a regular season was 2017. It was the Monday night game against Washington. Just pick Washington Monday night and you'll probably be okay,
you'll find
right?
A winner.
Yeah, Carson Wentz had over 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. Like if you just want pure highlights, like go for that, or you could do like one of the blowouts 2 years ago, Gino, the Pittsburgh or Tennessee game. Those are fun. The A.J. Brown revenge game, or the Steelers game.
NFC Championship game would be a great one.
Too. Yeah, that's a great one too.
Chaos for the whole game, man. And like you see the pick six and you're like, man, how can it get better than this? And then you forget, oh, we got the flea flicker touchdown to Torrey Smith here. That would be a great one as well.
I'm a sicko. I like the deep tracks too. So like, give me 2019 Eagles Washington, the Greg Ward game where he mosses Josh Norman to win the game at the buzzer. Or 28. Here's a fun. If you want an underrated one, Mark, that you don't want to play the hits. 2018 Eagles Texans. Gino, that game has everything.
Very good.
High scoring, back and forth, great quarterback play. Nick Foles versus Deshaun Watson. That final drive was nuts, where Clowney hit Foles late on 3rd and long, on 3rd and 17, the back of the end zone. He hits Alshon Jeffrey in triple coverage. Like, that game was awesome, too.
I feel like we're doing a disservice to anybody that watched games, like, before the 2000s.
Well, I'm 27.
I think on
what
the
do you
show,
want?
Luke, I have an idea. We do, like, during a week, we watch a whole season worth of, like, condensed games. We go, like,
I'm in for
start,
that.
like, 1981 and just continue.
All right, I got an old one for you.
During
the pandemic, like peak pandemic, when there was nothing to do, I was watching a lot of Randall Cunningham. There was a game in 1990 where he should have, I think he won MVP that year, or was a top candidate for it. He played the Patriots, and the Patriots were terrible at the time. Cunningham, I believe, had like 5 or 6 touchdowns combined, and he just went off. Like, give me a game where there's just nuclear quarterback play. Like a 2013, how about Eagles Raiders, the full 7 touchdown? Like that's another goal. Just give me points.
When you have a bunch of people around, you want something that's going to draw the attention, because
it starts conversations.
Great defensive games that you would want to see, where like sickos like you and I would.
The body bag game, maybe, I guess.
Yeah, the body bag.
That's a
game
good one.
would be a good one. I just read a book on that game as well. That's one of those ones that it's a different NFL these days, but. If I had to give you one, I know it ends sadly.
Okay.
With the second half of the 2008 NFC Championship game.
I don't think I could do it.
Was fantastic. You're down 21-3 coming out of half, and you're like, "Oh, this game turn out and be exciting," and it turned into absolute chaos. Yeah, you did lose it, but hey, it's the journey. It's not the outcome. It was a great one, but
that's a good one too. It hurts though. I don't think like you could say Super Bowl 57 in that way. It was such a fun game, but I mean you can't bring yourself to do that on a holiday.
That would be like That would be the ultimate way to kind of like.
That's on Valentine's Day when you're single and sad and you want to feel worse. Just throw on Super Bowl 57.
Have you watched it all the way through one time?
No. Even when I see like Jalen Hurts Super Bowl highlights thrown on Twitter, I can't even. It's too good to watch because that makes it more frustrating. It's like they should have won the game. I can't even think about it.
No, those are games that I like the first Champions League final that Manchester City was ever in. You lose, and it's like I'll never watch that game again. Throw that tape out. That's never going to be seen.
I think
ever again.
The two hardest games to watch are probably 2008 and Super Bowl 57 for me, at least.
Doesn't get much worse than that.
No.
It doesn't get much worse than that. All right, I got one quick question, and I would love to hear the listeners. Who on the Eagles? Joey Chestnut obviously didn't perform in the big one. Who could have legitimately challenged those guys at the Nathaniel's competition in a hot dog eating contest?
Oh my gosh!
If I had to take one guy.
King Dunlap. I just need size.
Oh, you're going to take a old... I'm thinking like
Jordan
Jordan
are you thinking
Mailata.
right now?
Jordan Mailata, I believe.
Yeah, give me one of the unicorns, Jordan Davis or Jordan Mailata. I feel like Lane Johnson
Davis would be a good one too.
Lane Johnson low key, I feel. Or no, you know what? Landon Dickerson. Give me Lane. I think that dude could pound hot dogs.
You just sit him down with a couple of brews, and you're just like, this guy's gonna kill a billion of them.
Bama boy. I don't know, man. I might
ballpark or something.
Dickerson might be my guy.
That would be a good discussion, like amongst the guys there, who would actually win that, or like a legitimate Philly cheesesteak eating competition too. Like,
there's so much bread that would be impossible.
Hey, if you're an eater, if you're a world class eater, you're able to take down a couple of those guys. I took down my best was like 2.5 ever in one sitting.
Yeah, I don't think I could even. After one, I'm done. But I'm a little man, so for sure. But that was a great conversation. Thanks, Mark, for the question. We're gonna do that every Friday. It'll be Fan Friday as we continue our weekly segments as we continue to grow the show. 1,400 episodes in right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. We will be back on Monday. Got a bonus show for you tomorrow as well dropping. So subscribe to the podcast on all platforms and on YouTube as well. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.